Welcome. Let's take a look at our top story this hour. Protests have erupted in Hong Kong on the 23rd anniversary of the city's handover to China. Pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong are out on the streets condemning the newly enacted national security law. Hong Kong police have made their first arrest under a new anti-protest law. Police say 2 people were held for breaching the new law, including a man holding a pro-independence flag. Close to 30 people have been arrested by the Hong Kong police. Some of them have been charged under the new national security law. And Hong Kong's police chief has warned protesters that they will be arrested and prosecuted under the new law for displaying pro-independence materials. For the first time in 17 years, citizens have been denied permission to organize the annual pro-democracy rally to mark Handover Day. There is massive deployment of police force across the city. Many activists have disregarded the threat from the new security law and taken to the streets in defiance of the police ban. In Causeway District, the police fired water cannons to disperse the protesters. Pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong was also back on the streets one day after resigning from his party. Meanwhile, it was business as usual for Chief Executive Carrie Lam, who oversaw the flag-raising ceremony. A giant billboard was erected nearby to support the new security law. Lam has been a forceful proponent of the law, calling it the biggest development since Hong Kong's handover to China.
呢一次嘅立法被視為中央與香港特區關係自回歸以嚟最重要嘅發展，為完善香港維護國家主權、領土完整同埋安全制度踏出歷史性嘅一步。
There was action in the PLA garrison in Hong Kong as well. The troops stationed in Hong Kong carried out a joint military drill to showcase their land, air and sea capabilities. While the PLA claims it informed the Hong Kong government about the drill, the timing is indeed suspicious. These drills can only be interpreted as a warning to Beijing's opponents in the city. For more on this, we are being joined by Richard Kimber. Good afternoon to you, Richard. For the first time now in 17 years, pro-democracy rally to mark the handover day is not to happen, and about 30 people have been arrested under the new laws for protesting. Now, is this the end of Hong Kong as we know it, as many have been saying?
Well, that's certainly not the case if you listen to the message from Chief Executive Carrie Lam today. She's been saying this is the bright future for Hong Kong, that it will stabilise the economy, it will stabilise society here, and this is bringing Hong Kong closer to China in a way that will help to bring the whole of society back together. The protesters today, of course, don't really sympathise with that voice at all, and they've been coming out in force to oppose this new law, even though it's only been in force for half a day. In large numbers, the streets behind me have been filled with people. Police have been trying to disperse those people because, of course, they've said this is an unlawful assembly. They've banned all protests today because of social gathering restrictions under the coronavirus. So even in the last few minutes, there have been police running down the street here, firing tear gas to disperse the crowds. Now it seems almost like relative calm behind me, but things are ebbing and flowing so quickly in this part of the city at the moment as protest groups gather, gain more confidence, start chanting again just like they did last year. Police arrive and then very quickly try and disperse them, and the protesters move elsewhere. So it's very much a cat and mouse. It's very tense on the streets, just like it felt at points last year, and certainly that stability that the government and pro-China groups that support the government on this law are craving is not showing up on the streets today.
And Beijing has slammed international criticism over the controversial new law, this national security law for Hong Kong, saying that other countries should keep their noses out of it.
Yes, the message from Beijing all along has been that there's no need for other countries to interfere in what they call the internal affairs of China and Hong Kong. They don't see this as being an international issue at all. The UK, the US certainly don't see it that way. The US has been upping the ante with more sanctions, visa restrictions and so on Chinese officials, and the UK extending again that offer to holders of the British National Overseas Passport here in Hong Kong to consider getting full citizenship in the United Kingdom. Now this law is now in place. Many people here seriously considering their future here, whether they just be members of the public or people in the business community who are now questioning more fundamentally than they might have been in previous weeks whether or not they think there is a long-term future for Hong Kong, or whether or not other, for example, international finance hubs in Asia such as Singapore, Bangkok and so on would actually be a more attractive place to base all of their assets. So a lot of uncertainty really in the days and weeks ahead, even though this law is now certainly in place. Still too many questions being asked by the judiciary and by public bodies here trying to understand how this bill can be implemented and introduced here without causing further upheaval.
Right, and as you mentioned earlier, Lam has been a forceful proponent for this law, calling it the biggest development since Hong Kong's handover to China.
Yes, and she has the backing of big business here who really, for business reasons more than anything, need to make sure that they stay in tune with the government's plans and with China's plans. She also has the backing of pro-government groups who long for Hong Kong to return to some form of stability, and they long for these protests to end, and they see this law as a means to do that. But what she doesn't do is she doesn't really have the broad support of the entire Hong Kong population, which is why you're seeing again protests coming out even despite this police ban. And talking to protesters here, there's really a mix of views. Some think that they will continue unabated and continue making their voice of opposition strong. Others being slightly more pragmatic, really, and saying that under this new law they can't see it being possible for there to be large street protests in the way that we saw last year. And they think that much of the protest movement will now recede to being an online movement and actually require more efforts to try and get more backing from the international community and more support from the likes of the US and the UK to pressure China and the Hong Kong government to think twice about pushing this new legislation too hard.
Richard, thank you very much for that report. That's our correspondent, Richard Kimber, bringing us the latest from Hong Kong.